Rhetoric, obviously the art of communication. We want to make sure that our ideas are not only coherent, but that they're straight. And when we are keeping our ideas straight, we need to make sure we remember how to not only recognize the issue, but when the issue is being deviated from, or in this case, thrown back at us without actually being dealt with. You don't return to sender unless an error has actually been made. So when we're talking about this issue, the next fallacy that we'll be talking about, the mistake, or I guess miscategorization is the word I was looking for, in thinking, is the Latin phrase tu quoque, which is a form of something we've already discussed, the attack on the person, the ad hominem, but in a different style. How is that?
Yeah, so tu quoque, in case you don't speak Latin, just means you also. Right? Yeah. And so just like ad hominem, for those of you guys who are following along in our rhetoric lessons, ad hominem is not actually engaging with someone in their argument, but it is attacking the person. So it'd be like someone giving you a well thought out argument about, their belief systems, and you going, well, you suck. That's ad hominem. So you're not actually engaging with them on any intellectual level. You're just attacking them straight off. This tu quoque fallacy, it's more commonly known as whataboutism. So have you ever heard that phrase, whataboutism? That's the tu quoque fallacy, because most people, again, don't speak Latin and don't want to sound pretentious, so they just call it whataboutism. This is, and I actually like that phrase because that's exactly what it is. I usually am going to use this fallacy when an accusation is leveled against me. So when someone is attacking my position, I respond by attacking them in a completely unrelated fashion. So in recent months, you could see this happening, say, with the January 6th hearing. So people are investigating what happened on January 6th, where a bunch of rioters went into the Capitol building in the United States to protest the election of Joseph Biden against Donald Trump. Now, some Republicans have responded to that and said, well, what about all the BLM riots? So that is a different issue. You still have to address the accusations that they have made against January 6th. You can't just say, well, what about this other thing? You have to intellectually address what's being leveled at you. Now, there is a way to do that. There is a proper way to point out hypocrisy, which we'll talk about later. But for the sake of this, you have to understand, if someone gives you an argumentation against your belief system, you have to be ready to deal with that accusation and not just say, well, what about that? So a good example happens in Islam versus Christian debates all the time. So a Christian will bring up, hey, in your sources, you say that Allah is a loving God, right? Be like, well, yeah. Well, how come it says over and over again in the Quran that Allah does not love people who don't do right things? Or how about the fact that Allah actually says that Christians and polytheists are the worst of people, the worst of creatures, sorry, not just people? It doesn't really sound like Allah does love everybody. It does sound like Allah has some favorites, and it seems like it's the Islamic people, and everybody else is on his bad side unless they convert. And the answer that usually a lot of Muslims will give in that moment is, well, what about your God? He has the Israelites wipe out the Canaanites. What about that? So that is a fair accusation. However, it doesn't address what you said, right? So if you're bringing up an accusation against their God, they have to defend that on its own merits. They cannot then attribute some sort of a false accusation to you or a true accusation to you. They have to be interested in what you said.
Because note, at the end of that conversation, what have they proven? Now you've got two people that hate others, not one less person, which is what you're hopefully trying to prove, or clarifying the hatred as being of behavior rather than of them intrinsically. That's the point. If they make this argument, and even if it's with credit where it's due, you can't make that claim or that conclusion and get yourself off the hook. Changing the topic or adding a subplot to this story just makes the movie longer. It doesn't actually resolve the story.
Right, absolutely. So if you guys have been kind of keeping track, I have been trying to pick the fallacies in order of how often I see them. And I think this one does fit neatly in the little list that we've been going over. And the reason why is because you see it all over the place. It happens all the time, especially in politics. But beyond politics, I see this one happening a lot in interpersonal conflict. So I see it a lot as a counselor between husband and wife. I see it a lot between parents and their kids, or even friends, where communication starts to break down and this whataboutism starts to rule the day. So a wife catches the husband doing something unsavory and she says, I can't believe you did this to me. And he turns around and says, well, what about the fact that you don't love me? Or what about the fact that you mistreat me? So this is very common. It's very prevalent within interpersonal conflict. And we need to know not only what it is so that we don't do it, right? So that we're very careful to actually respond to accusations in humility and in honesty, but also to recognize it when you hear your opponent do it or the person that you're trying to talk to do it, so that you could address it properly and not go into the weeds, which is what happens when conversations deteriorate into whataboutism. So if you give into it, then the conversation just deteriorates into a shooting match, right? So it's just like, well, you did this, well, you did that, well, you did this, and it goes back and forth that way until, I don't know, someone gets tired and walks away. But it doesn't really lead to anything good. And this is why, once again, in marital conflict, if you find yourself having 16 arguments within one, that's probably because you guys have devolved into whataboutism. It's because you're just pointing fingers at one another and you can't even remember what the original conflict was about.
And not resolving any of them.
Right. Not resolving any of them, just putting them on the shelf and waiting to pick it up again. And now you'll have 17 different arguments to fight about. So we need to be very careful about this. We need to know what it is and, again, how to address it properly. Anything else you want to get into? You actually wanted to share a passage.
Yeah, we are looking for examples in the Bible, obviously there are examples of bad argumentation that's addressed, but in the case of tu quoque, our Lord actually gives us an example of how to avoid it, because as we started with the tu quoque fallacy in all of its shining glory, you bring up the issue, and you mentioned the January 6 hearings, in order to effectively respond with what about the BLM riots? All that would be needed for that to be a valid argument is one sentence clarifying the difference. And this is what we're talking about. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 5, again, the famous Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is speaking about dealing with a sinful brother. Now, if this was a tu quoque fallacy, we'd only read a third of this verse, which we're seeing a lot of in this day and age. But notice how our Lord resolves that issue by finishing the sentence. In the exchange, I'm sure you're all familiar with this. Let me start in verse 4. How can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite! First remove the plank from your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the plank from your brother's eye. Now, where's the line? If I simply acknowledged, there's a speck in your eye, and the reply is, hypocrite, there's a plank in your eye, that would be tu quoque. Yeah. But what does Jesus go on to say? First, you deal with the plank in your eye, then you will be able to see clearly to do what? Remove the speck. Both are problems, but he addresses the order in which they need to be. If you address the issue, you've resolved the argument. Then, if you level it back at the person, it's not a fallacy, it's called a response.
Right.
So if we are talking to people about their issues and you say, well, what about this issue in your life? Or even maybe you know someone's being a little fast and loose with the truth and you want to call out an inconsistency by answering their question with a question. You don't commit the tu quoque fallacy if you can first clarify to the person with full sincerity, got to clarify that you are saying, I'll be happy to deal with that issue if you can first clarify something with me. So you're talking to a Muslim. Where did Jesus say, I am God, worship me? You can deal with that by addressing the criteria. Where did he say, I'm only a prophet, don't worship me? They can go to passages in the Quran, or they can accuse you of saying tu quoque or changing the topic. Well, that's not the point. That's not the intent. That's not the motive. You may need to take a step back and go, well, here's this passage, and this passage. And then they'll say, no. I mean, where does he say the words, I'm only a prophet, don't worship me? Or where does he say, I'm the words, I'm God, worship me? That's when you get into the bad argument. But you need to make sure you're addressing these things, the goal of rhetoric, in proper order. Your ideas are straight. So what's the difference? Dealing with the issue.
Right.
If you're talking to someone, make sure that if an issue is brought up, you don't move on to another topic or don't conclude the matter until the issue's actually been addressed. There are ways of going about it. There's a fine art to argumentation, as Stephen Molyneux was oftentimes quoted as saying, but the point being made is just that. What's the difference? Addressing the actual issue. I bring up something, you address it, then can reply with it. You don't reply with another issue.
Yeah.
That's a fallacy.
Absolutely. So, in counseling, let's use a marriage example real quick, and then we'll get into the kind of political or philosophical or theological debate. So, if a wife comes to the husband and says, "You've done this." Now, this takes a large amount of humility. The reason why we don't want to respond directly to accusations is because it hurts our pride. It hurts our self-respect. It's shameful for us to talk about these things. We feel attacked. We feel threatened. So if you need to take a time out, if you need to take a space real quick, if someone comes at you in a harsh manner and you say, "Hey, I need a second," that's okay. But you need to respond to what they're saying. You need to acknowledge what they're saying. You need to acknowledge that you've heard them. And if you have legitimately done something wrong, you need to apologize. You need to say, "Hey, you know what? That was wrong. I hope you can forgive me for that." Right? I hope you can forgive me for what you're saying. That's a very important part of this type of argumentation. In the Proverbs, it says, "A soft answer allays wrath and contention." So if I'm going to feed the fire, if my wife comes to me and she's upset with something that I've done, if I feed the fire by accusing her of something, then, like I said, we're not going to go anywhere good. I need to acknowledge what she's saying. I need to acknowledge that I've heard her, I've listened to her, and if I feel like she's wrong and I'm going to defend myself, I need to first acknowledge that I've heard what she's had to say. Say, "Okay, so you're telling me that you believe I've done this. Is that accurate?" She says, "Yeah." Then I move into defending myself. And I try to even work through it, because sometimes people talk in generalizations. So they say, like, "You don't care about me." Right? It would be very easy for you to say, "Well, that's not true," and to go that way. But to say, "Okay, well, like, in what ways do I not care about you?" Right? Because I do care about you, I do love you, but I acknowledge that I could be negligent sometimes. I acknowledge I could be stupid and selfish. And so in what ways do you feel like I've been neglecting you because I want to do better?
No, you're not changing the topic, you're clarifying the topic.
Exactly.
You're dealing with the issue.
Exactly. And by the way, this is also good when someone comes at you with a fiery question about the Bible. So you're talking to them about Jesus, hey, why haven't you accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior? Why don't you believe that the Scripture is divinely inspired or something like that? And someone comes back at you and says, "Well, you Christians, look at the Inquisitions, look at the Crusades." They start going in that direction. Now, if you want to avoid the fallacy, you need to stop and say, "Okay, are you telling me, right, and what you're bringing up, are you telling me that the reason you don't accept Scripture or the reason why you don't accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior is because of this?" Right. So if I were to answer this question, right, your dad likes to say, if I were to answer this question to your satisfaction, would you put your faith in Jesus? Is this really the main issue that is preventing you from faith? Now, just saying it that way can sometimes calm people down. Sometimes it goes the opposite direction. They say like, you see, you're not even willing to answer the question. And what about this? And what about that? And then they bring up like 50 other things. Then you're not really dealing with a serious person.
Or we could be the less serious person and reply with, "Well, what about the Holocaust? What about the killing fields? What about the pogroms and all that other stuff?" It's not addressing the actual issue. The answer, and this is just for your edification at home, so you're objecting to Jesus because of the historical actions of his followers. Obviously, that doesn't follow.
Right.
Focus on Jesus. But if, on the other hand, they have this bent, obviously no one knows what the Crusades are these days, let alone the significance of the fact the Muslims founded the Inquisition.
They think they know what they are,
they're
which is
told
more dangerous.
What they are, which is, of course,
yeah.
Like you said. But the point being made is that address the actual issue. If you can answer the question quickly, great. But what happens when you're talking to people is that you're dealing just as much with emotions as you are with logic. Make sure that all are addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes this also helps, again, if someone's coming at you in a fiery way, it helps for you to, we use this phrase sometimes, to steel man their argument, meaning that you are trying to sift out what you believe this person's actually saying, because they're coming across in a really ineloquent way, they're coming across in just a defamatory way, or just an emotional way. And so you're trying to say, okay, well, are you saying that the reason why you reject God is because you think he's immoral? Or would you say that maybe what you're trying to communicate to me is that you find the God of the Bible immoral, right? You find his actions immoral for some reason.
Or you think that the actions of Christians throughout history are obeying some biblical command that is immoral, and
that
you
it's
don't want to
coming
follow
from
that.
Christianity as opposed to distortion of Christianity, right? So sometimes helping people with their thoughts is like a little bit of a grace that you can give people in conversations like this. And like I said, it can calm down people in that moment. So if you're, again, you need to swallow your pride if you're in a fight with your spouse and they make some really generalized and unfair accusation against you, to try to steelman their argument, to try to say, okay, well, obviously that's not true. In your head, you could just say, do this calculus in your head. It's obviously untrue. Obviously I care about you. You know that. But try to figure out what they're saying. Okay, are you talking about this? Are you talking about that? Are you saying I don't care about you because maybe I forgot to buy you something that you asked me for, or because I have been absentee from the house or something like that, or I just haven't been paying attention to you in the way that you want, right? Try to steelman their argument the best they can, try to help them through with their thoughts, and then you can acknowledge them. Now, how do you then bring up relevant details without engaging in the two quoque fallacies? So
You remember the actual issue.
So let's go back, because I think this is a good one. I think this is a good example, the January 6th committee. So if someone were to say, someone who is on the left side of the aisle is accusing the right side of the aisle of insurrection. They say, like, well, you know, you Republicans, you right-wingers, you are just completely against the role of democracy in our elections. You just think you can overthrow any election that doesn't go your way. You're radical. You just are willing to put up with anything like this, and you need to condemn it. You can, right? So if I agree with the right side of the aisle politically, I could say, yeah, January 6th was ugly. It was a disgusting display by a bunch of lunatics, and they deserve to go to jail. However, would you be willing to acknowledge that the people, the same congressmen and senators that are screaming in the January 6th committee, also voted against the validation of the 2016 election, claiming Russian collusion? Do you think that that's insurrection? Now, that's not whataboutism. That's saying, I want to play by the same set of rules, right? So I'm willing to acknowledge that that was wrong. Are you willing to acknowledge that that was wrong? Because if they're not, then what you see is, okay, well, then your problem isn't necessary with insurrectionary behavior. Your problem is you don't like my side. And that's it. It doesn't really matter what my side does. You're going to hate it. And it doesn't matter what your side does. You're going to love it, right? That's a problem. Now, if you're talking to a serious person and you say, okay, well, do you think that was wrong? They'll say, yeah, maybe I've never really thought about that. Yeah, I guess that was wrong. Yeah, and then you know you're playing by the same set of rules, and you can have a logical and intellectual conversation. But if they're unwilling to do that, then like I said, they're not willing to play by the same set of rules, and therefore it doesn't really matter. Or let's say your spouse is accusing you of something, but you feel like they've actually committed the greater wrong. So let's say you get into a fight and you end up saying something that is unsavory. You know, you yell at them, which happens, right? We lose our temper, we lose our cools. It's unfortunate. We're fallen individuals, but we do it. We yell at people, we call them names, and we shouldn't do it, but we do. So you lose your cool in a fight, you yell, you scream at your spouse, you call them a name or something like that, and they start saying, I can't believe you said this to me. I can't believe you did it. And let's say, though, that the fight was about their behavior. They had done something really wrong, and now they're just playing the pity party about how you treated them within the fight. So it's okay to acknowledge you're wrong, right? Especially, I always tell this to husbands, like, hey, if you're the head of the house, you got to lead. And that means you need to lead in humility. You need to lead an apology. So if your wife accuses you of wrong, accept it, apologize for it, ask for forgiveness, and then if you feel like there's a relevant accusation against her, say like, okay, yes, I lost my temper, I lost my cool. I hope you can forgive me for that because that was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way. Okay. And then when she says, okay, I can forgive you, then you move on. You say, however, I was reacting to something you did. So it's wrong. I'm not defending it, but I was reacting to something that you did, a behavior that you did. And I do want to address that, right? I do want to talk about that. It's probably not going to come out as cool and collected as it is right now on the air, but that's okay. It's that kind of transition. Like Sean said, take the plank out of your eye, acknowledge what you did, but then address what's going on in their life, right? That's not whataboutism. That is dealing with what you got to deal with before you deal with what you want to deal with in that person's life.
All right, so let us know if that's all clear, and thank you for joining us for this week in Rhetoric.